Good morning, everyone. What's up? I'm on partial shadow ban. It's hard to find my videos. You can't find the first three. So if you want to see my videos, go to vincentbrunoshadowban.blogspot.com. It's at the bottom of the screen and in the description box. The title of this is Jehovah's Witnesses and Judeo-Freemasonry. We are going to be talking about that today. But if you want to find more about Jehovah's Witnesses and Judeo-Freemasonry, go to bewisestserpents.blogspot.com. That is in the bottom of the screen and in the description box. I am looking for ex-Jehovah's Witnesses to discuss the connections between Jehovah's Witnesses and Freemasonry, and also just taking down the organization in general. My email is vincent.bruno.1229@gmail.com. Okay, so today we're going to be watching a documentary called Jehovah's Witnesses and Freemasons. Is there a link? And we're not a documentary, just a kind of little show. We'll watch something after that as well. Maybe. Though I'm not sure. And okay, so we are also reading The Watchtower and the Masons by Fritz Springmeier. That's what we've been reading. And okay, so I'm just going to continue in that. So we were talking about what the Masons and the Jehovah's Witnesses, or Charles Taze Russell at that time, had in common. So both see an exclusiveness to truth. In regards to this subject, it is instructive to remember that the actual New Testament Greek word for truth, aletheia, meant its basic meaning focuses on that which is open to view, that which is unconcealed and transparent. For sure to be truth means avoidance of falsehood and deception. Truth is beautiful. There's no purpose to hide it. Russell believed he himself was a revelation of God, and that without his books, people would be lost. In one sense, Russell believed his books were superior to the Bible. The Bible, divinely inspired, could not be understood by anyone until his books, divinely directed, came along. In other words, to understand the Bible, one needed another revelation. But this revelation and books could be understood by everyone without a divinely directed commentary or revelation. Russell warned his followers not to turn to others for light. He said Bible students need to beware of those many who present themselves as special teachers and brought new lights. Okay, in Masonry, there is underlying all Masonic thinking and writing an attitude and spirit of elitism, which says Masonry is not for everyone, just for the select few. At the same time, Masonry teaches it is the only religion and that all other religions are but corrupt and perverted forms of Masonry. This is both elitist and contradictory. The light of Freemasonry is its secrets and pathways to perfection are only for the elite few initiated into the knowledge and wisdom. Excluded are women, Negroes, the poor who haven't the money with which to pay, the cripples, blind, and deaf who can't perform the recognition signs or see and hear them, and the feeble-minded who can't receive the teachings or be trusted to protect them. All such people, including the wives, the daughters, and some of the sons of Masons, are considered profane, unclean, unworthy, and can never be anything else. No references are required here, for it is common knowledge. The Deadly Deception, page 140. Both appeal to reason, to mysteries, and hidden knowledge. Russell's literature abounds with mention of hidden knowledge, of mysteries, and so forth. As a sampling of this, consider Volume 1, Studies in the Scriptures, page 20. The glorious mystery of his throne, hidden from ages, now made known. Page 27, Paul wasn't permitted to tell the mysteries of God. He hadn't revealed his plan up to then. There has existed a necessity for keeping the mysteries, God's plan, hidden. Because Russell was promoted as God's servant, dispensing spiritual food, whatever he said became truth. That blind obedience was later redirected into a collective, faithful, and wise servant class. What the elite say and do becomes right by itself. Yes. Masonry. The Mason Steinbrenner, in his Origin and Early History of Masonry, page 229, tells of the great obligation to conceal Masonic work. The Deadly Deception, page 142, Masonry is, according to its own philosophers, a system of pure religion expressed in symbols, one which cannot be understood without a knowledge of the true meaning of them. This makes a proper understanding of those symbols terribly important. For the Christian Mason, accepting and guarding those symbols and their secrets with its physical life at stake, he must understand them. They are trusting in their teachings of the lodge concerning these symbols with their eternal redemption or damnation at stake. Herein lies the most terrible manifestation of Masonic morality, that philosophy of the elite which makes whatever they do right because it is they, the elite, who do it. Okay, both while appealing to reason, feel no compunction in regard to historical facts, no matter how certain the historical evidence might be against their chosen view. Russell, secular history is no standard by which to correct the supposed errors of the Bible. We are not called upon to harmonize these chronological dates with the tangled records of secular history. Russell's chronology disregards many historical events. The Watchtower Society continues to this day to regard 607 BC as the fall of Jerusalem, in spite of the massive, overwhelming evidence that it took place in 586 to 587 BC. For further information along this line, the reader is directed to Carl Olaf Johnson's excellent expose, The Gentile Times Reconsidered, La Jolla, California, Good News Defender, 1983. Harrison's vision of glory also converts numerous witness twistings of historical facts. Witness claims to antiquity are as fictional as the Masonic myths. Several JWs and authors have all stated that they are not part of an organization. It appears this is a new thing they have been taught to say. Masonry. Steinbrenner, G.W., Past Master, Origin and Early History of Masonry, page 19 to 20, speaks about the Masonic practice of turning fiction to fact. On page 28, he suggests, let Freemasons give up their vain boasts with ignorance has foisted into the order and relinquish a fabulous antiquity rather than sacrifice common sense. In many ways, the Freemasons have been increasingly following this path and being more realistic. There are still some schools of Masonic thought that give credence to legend and myth. When the author interviewed a 33rd degree Scottish Rite and a Knights Templar, both men denied that the Freemasons are secretive. No, we are not secretive. We're accused of that. The Masons' own periodical Knights Templar 1988, page 20 says, in addition, many elderly members in particular maintain the veil of secrecy when questioned, clinging to the old way of refusing to divulge any information about the organization. Both are fascinated with numbers and special a cryptic meaning for numbers. Russell, Harrison, Vision of Glory, page 48. Russell's calculations are not easy to unravel. They are, however, not without a certain quaint interest. New dates previously unmentioned spring up like weeds in Russell's writings, which defy synopsis. How that man loved numbers and charts. It is fruitless to speculate, perhaps, but what if he hadn't been a child whiz bookkeeper? Russell wasn't the first or last man to snow people with numbers. Russell studied the meaning of numbers. He studied numbers. Masonry. A brief look at Masonic books will display their attachment to hidden meanings and dates within Freemasonry. Part of the Masonic ritual is described on page 104 of The Deadly Deception. The Sovereign Grand Commander closed the meeting of the Supreme Council with the mystic number, striking with his sword 5, 3, 1, and then 2 times. Often after the closing prayer, we all said Amen, 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 and it was over. The key in Masonry to Kabbalistic thought is the Sefer Yetzirah or Sefer HaZohar. Within the book, number symbology is important. Chapter 1 deals with the number 10. Chapter 2 deals with the number 22. Chapter 3 deals with the number 3. Chapter 4 with the number 7. And Chapter 5 with the number 12. Okay. God's orders broken, ranks and degrees and oaths. Russell, these are the type of things Russell thinks about. Within Masonry, there are several arrangements of orders. One is 3-order arrangement. One finds Russell also creative creating various orders and arrangements of orders. Russell gave a sermon saying there are 3 orders or classes of elect ones. In another place, he appeared to have elect divisions into 5 degrees. The teaching of the pastor Russell. Connor lists 5 types of salvation, that is, 5 groups who receive different degrees in the future life according to the Russell. Professors of systematic theology in the Southwest Baptist Theology Seminary, Watchtower, Connor said regarding Russell's degrees of salvation, I have heard people talk about degrees in heaven or in rewards, but Mr. Russell has nearly as many varieties of salvation as there are pickles of a certain brand, almost 57 varieties. Not only is the scheme complex in that it has so many degrees of salvation, but also that it tries to be a plan of redemption based on atonement appropriated by faith, and yet constantly runs backwards to work as a basis, runs back to works as a basis, works-based. In newspaper sermon of C.T. Russell, 1901 to 1910, covering Russell's July 106 sermon, God's very elect has a part entitled 3 classes of elections, the elect little flock of this gospel age, which alone will constitute the bride class, otherwise called the body of Christ, and which is to share with the Lord of kingdom honors and glories, and made so prominent in the scriptures that the 2 other classes of elect ones are in comparison not very conspicuous. Refer to chapter 8 for more of this Masonic view on the next page. Okay, Masonry. Those oaths and obligations, usually called just obligations, are considered unbreakable and are collectively the thing that make a man of Masonry. In this way, these oaths are the concrete cornerstone of Masonry. 1, the question, what makes you a Mason? The answer, my obligation. Question and answer from, okay, what makes you a Mason? My obligation. 2, binding myself under no less a penalty than that of having my throat cut from ear to ear, my tongue torn out by its roots, and with my body buried in the rough sand of the sea, a cable's length from the shore, where the tide ebbs and flows twice in 24 hours, from the oath of obligation, entered apprentice 1st degree. 3, binding myself under no less a penalty than that of having my left breast torn open, my heart plucked out and given to the beasts of the field and fowls of the air as a prey. 4, binding myself under no less a penalty than that of having my body served in twain, my bowels taken out and buried to ashes and burnt to ashes, and the ashes scattered to the 4 winds of the heavens. These blood oaths are given at the end of initiation into the Masonic degrees, binding the initiates to protect the secrets of the degree. Okay, let's watch the doc now.
Hello there, I'm Lloyd Evans and you're watching the John Cedars channel from the bunker, and in this video we will be talking about Freemasons and whether or not they have a connection with Jehovah's Witnesses. Now, before I get into this, let me get this right out of the way. I don't want to be making this video. This is not a video that I would ordinarily have made if it were purely my decision. But as many of you will know, I have patrons who support my work, and every month we run a vote as to which video my patrons would like me to make. And one of the winning videos from these monthly votes was a video on Freemasons and whether or not there are links to Jehovah's Witnesses. So again, ordinarily, I just wouldn't be addressing this topic because as far as I'm concerned, and spoiler alert, there is no link. It's a subject that I'm aware lots of ex-Jehovah's Witnesses jump up and down about. But not only is it very hard to establish any kind of credible link between Jehovah's Witnesses and Freemasons, why would you want that to be one of the main issues that you're talking about when we can be talking about child sex abuse, we can be talking about shunning, We can be talking about domestic violence. We can be talking about blood transfusions. There are any number of pressing issues that are worthy of discussion and criticism before we start getting to issues like, is there a link between Freemasons and Jehovah's Witnesses? But interestingly, there is no link. So if nothing else, hopefully in this video, I can put to bed that question for those who are perhaps on the fence, wondering whether there's anything to it. And Exhibit A in my argument, in which I'm going to hopefully do this, is this page from the June 15th, 1895 Watchtower. This is reprints page 1827. And this is basically a questions from readers where someone has written in to Charles Taze Russell. You see there at the beginning, "Dear brother," meaning I'm addressing Brother Russell. I have a question. And the question is about secret societies such as the Masons, such as United Workmen, such as Knights of Pythias, and these societies offering things like life insurance, so offering certain benefits to their members. Is it advisable for Bible students, as witnesses were known back then? Is it advisable for them to be getting involved in societies such as these? Now, you would think if Charles Taze Russell were a Freemason, he would at the very least be saying, yes, there's nothing wrong with it. You might even expect him to be saying, yes, you should totally get involved in societies like that. Instead, he says the exact opposite. And you'll see there I've selected a portion of the text highlighted in blue. Russell says, "We note also that the Order of Freemasons, if judged by its past history, has some secret object or scheme more than fraternity and financial aid in times of sickness or death. And so far as we can judge, there is a certain amount of profane worship or mummery connected with the rites of this order and some others, which the members do not comprehend, but which in many cases serves to satisfy the cravings of the natural mind for worship, and thus hinders it from seeking the worship of God in spirit and in truth through Christ, the only appointed mediator and grand master." Now, just before we move on, I just want to draw your attention to those words that Russell chose. He says there in italics that the Freemasons have a certain amount of profane worship, profane in italics, and then he uses the word mummery, and mummery is a word, an archaic word that we just don't use anymore. So allow me to expand on what he means there. He means that the Freemasons, they have ceremonies that have nothing to do with the sacred or religious. That's what profane means. And mummery means ridiculous or extravagant ceremonial procedures. So he's saying that there's nothing really about the Freemasons that has anything to do with serious sacred worship of God, and it's just basically a load of extravagant or silly rituals that they perform. And I would agree with that. So let's move on with the quote. "In proportion as such societies consume valuable time in foolish, senseless rites and ceremonies, and in substituting the worship of their officers and the use of words and symbols which have no meaning to them for the worship of God in his appointed way through Christ, and according to knowledge and the spirit of a sound mind, in that proportion these societies are grievous evils, regardless of the financial gains or losses connected with membership in them." Grievous evils. So you may wonder, if you're a complete neutral, why I'm zeroing in on Charles Taze Russell. It's because when most ex-witnesses talk about Freemasonry and Jehovah's Witnesses, they talk about Charles Taze Russell, and they cite the fact that he was buried near a Masonic lodge, which isn't true. He was buried in a normal graveyard. As far as I can tell, it was originally a graveyard that was mostly Catholic. And then in 1996, a Masonic lodge was built nearby. So he wasn't buried at a Masonic lodge. It's true that he was buried near a pyramid structure that was erected by his followers, clearly not by him. But I'll get to the whole pyramid thing later. The point is, most of the fascination with Freemasonry tends to focus on Charles Taze Russell. And here we have, in his periodical, Charles Taze Russell saying, it's actually a total waste of time, Freemasonry. These are silly rituals that do nothing but distract from the approved way of worshipping God through Christ. And actually, when you think about it in those terms, these secret societies, or secret societies like Freemasons, are grievous evils. I can't think of a more stronger denunciation of Freemasonry if you were looking for one. Now, at this point, some ex-witnesses will be saying, yes, but what about the cross and crown motif that Bible students used to wear back in Russell's day? And in fact, Bible students do still use that motif, because there are Bible students who don't affiliate themselves in any way with Jehovah's Witnesses or Watchtower, and they still use that motif. And that has origins in, I believe, the Knights Templar. It basically predates the Watchtower movement. And they'll also say, what about the winged disc on the front of Studies in the Scriptures? Studies in the Scriptures is a series of volumes that were written by Charles Taze Russell. They were originally called Millennial Dawn, and they didn't used to have the winged disc on the front. In fact, they had a silver lamp on a book on the spine. That was the only real symbolism that they had on the cover. And apart from the silver lamp, they just had the words Studies in the Scriptures, or earlier copies were called Millennial Dawn. They changed the name from Millennial Dawn to Studies in the Scriptures because people apparently were confusing Millennial Dawn with, maybe this is a novel. Studies in the Scriptures kind of got to the point more quickly as to what the books were about. So around the very early 1900s, they switched to using this style of cover for Studies in the Scriptures with a winged disc on the front. And people point to this as having kind of pagan or Egyptian or Masonic links to it. It does certainly look kind of rather unusual, from a 21st century perspective. But Jim Penton, who I've actually interviewed on this channel, writes about this in his third edition of Apocalypse Delayed on pages 64 and 415. He says, instead of being drawn from Egyptian paganism, as has been asserted by Russell's adversaries, the winged discs simply represented the Sun of Righteousness that would arise with healing in his wings, according to Malachi 4 verse 2. As for the cross and crown motif, it was simply a common one in the 19th and earlier centuries that was used by many Christian groups. So the point of it all is that regardless of whether the winged disc or the cross and crown had certain links with the occult or with Knights Templar or paganism, that's not why they were chosen. They were chosen purely for aesthetic purposes. So there was a scriptural explanation given to this. The cross and crown obviously was referring or used to refer to the kingdom, and the cross clearly to Jesus at a time when Jehovah's Witnesses used to believe that Jesus died on a cross. They obviously ditched that teaching later on. But the point is, this is pure plagiarism. It's nothing about trying to kind of introduce the occult through the back door. If they wanted to do that, there are far more efficient ways of inducing people to serve Satan or serve the Illuminati or serve the occult. It was plain and simple imitation and plagiarism, nothing more. And further putting to bed the idea that Charles Taze Russell was a Mason, I would encourage you, if this subject interests you, to go to JW Facts. Paul Grundy has written an excellent article titled, "Was Charles Taze Russell a Freemason?" This is actually a fairly recent article that he wrote, I believe, in April 2017. And he goes through all of the reasons why we know he couldn't have been a Freemason, including some correspondence written by Barbara Anderson. She actually investigated with the lodges that Russell would have been a member of. She straight up wrote to them asking whether there was any record of him having been a member at those lodges. And they unequivocally wrote back and said, no, he wasn't a member. There's no record at all. We've checked, and there's no record at all of his name in any of our membership rolls. So we have a situation where Charles Taze Russell is condemning Freemasonry and secret societies like it as grievous evils, where the Freemasons disavow any knowledge of him ever having been a member. All we have to go on, if we do want to go down the conspiracy theorist route of insisting that Charles Taze Russell was a Freemason, is the symbols on the publications, which again can very simply be explained away as, well, it was imitation, it was plagiarism, it was seeing a symbol somewhere and thinking, oh, that's perfect to go on the front cover of my new book, because
Okay, I'm going to keep reading, but I think this guy is a little uninformed and doesn't know anything. There's a lot more than just the symbolism. If you go to bewisestserpents.blogspot.com, you can find all the information I have on Jehovah's Witnesses and Freemasonry. It's at the bottom of the screen in the description box. I think he's missing a lot, and I guess I have to go through and read that stuff, what that stuff is. It's all labeled out on the website. I'm not going to go through it right now. But anyway, let's keep reading The Watchtower and the Masons. Okay. Okay. Both believe Abraham and Melchizedek have progressed to a high degree in God's secret order. Russell, chapter 8, will touch on pastors' beliefs in this. Another reference would be there, Russell discusses how the order of Aaron transfers to the order of Melchizedek. In a related issue, the Urim and Thummim, Russell felt that these shined on and off to give the high priest a yes or no answer. Masonry. Joseph Smith Jr. seems to have learned some of these items from Freemasonry. It is generally supposed that the Essenes were the custodians of this knowledge and also the initiators and educators of Jesus. If so, Jesus was undoubtedly initiated in this same temple of Melchizedek where Pythagoras had studied 6 centuries before. Why is he, Jesus, referred to in the New Testament as called of God and high priest after the order of Melchizedek? The words after the order make Jesus one of the line or order of which there have been others of equal or even superior dignity. The Masonic, Hermetic, Kabbalistic, and Rosicrucian symbolism of philosophy. There's a Masonic, Hermetic, Kabbalistic, and Rosicrucian symbol philosophy. Oh, I want to get that book. Hold on. Okay. Both believe God built the pyramid, perhaps by Melchizedek. Pastor Russell teaches on the Great Pyramid and its hidden message was a prominent part of the man. In fact, he had himself buried under a pyramid, studied in his volume 1 are devoted to informing readers how wonderful the pyramid messages are for the world. Its perfection, Russell thinks, proves some master architect, God, guided its construction. From several indications, it seems that the Masons planned the pyramid is the Bible of divine origin, erected for the purpose of teaching the important truths of God's infinite wisdom and foreknowledge. Shem or Melchizedek built the pyramid during Russell's life. During Russell's life, the Bible students were given pyramid charts of different kinds. Okay, so Masonry concerning the Great Pyramid, the Freemasons book, The Sign and Symbols of Primordial Man, explains some of our signs and symbols are those used to represent the astronomical symbols of the ancient Egyptians and the whole of the world, as far as can it present the traced and afterward as sacred symbol when the symbol was perfected in their eschatology, and that the Great Pyramid of Giza was the first and still remains the great Masonic temple in the world, open to all Masons who can read symbolically what was written in the stone ages ago, teaching the principle that we teach that to all just, upright, and true Masons, there's nothing to fear, and that the Grand Master waits above, ready to receive with joy the souls of those who failed not in their hour of trial. Side by side with the Masonic mystery have come down to us variously papyri of sacred writings, which have been called the Ritual of Ancient Egypt or the Book of the Dead, and it is to this we turn for an explanation of the mysteries of the monument. Not only in the pyramid, however, were these rites and ceremonies practiced, we believe if we could obtain the whole papyri pyramid, we could find a perfect ritual of various eschatological ceremonies. Both interested in Egyptology, both Russell and Masonry, there is so much documentation to this in other portions of this book that this needs no further documentation. Later chapters will deal more with this aspect too in regards to the specific topic of the prophetic significance of the Great Pyramid. The following information may be useful in showing the connection between Russell's pyramidology and Masons and Rosicrucians. The Rosicrucians have published a number of studies on the prophetic and hidden meanings of the Great Pyramid. A Rosicrucian book from Russell's time period on the topic is The Symbolic Prophecy of the Great Pyramid by H. Spencer Lewis. Another more recent Rosicrucian book of the Great Pyramid is Peter Lemore's The Great Pyramid Decoded. Both do not understand the atonement of Christ as Christian theologians understood it. Both believe in works salvation. So Russell views have been well documented by many others. Masonry, a common theme from ex-Masons is that they are taught that they are taught if they live by the organization's precepts, they are free from sin. Why I Left Freemasonry, page 94, describes that redemption is a matter of self-improvement, obedience, and good works. Nothing is taught about faith in the atonement of Christ, but instead it is a step-by-step enlightenment achieved by going through degrees with their initiations and mysteries. The following Masonic references will be substantiate this. 1. By the lambskin, the Mason is reminded of their purity of life and rectitude of the conduct, which are so essentially necessary to this gaining admission into the celestial lodge above, where the supreme architect of the universe presides. Albert Mackey, Encyclopedia of Freemasonry, Apron. 2. And in thy favor may we be received thine everlasting kingdom to enjoy in union with the souls of our departed friends the just reward of pious and virtuous life. Amen. Texas Monitor Masonic Burial Service, page 10. 3. In Egypt and among the ancient nations, Freemasonry was one of the early agencies employed to effect improvement and enlightenment of man and make them comprehend the true principles of morality, which initiate men into a new order of life. Daniel Sickles, Ahamon Rezon, and Freemason's Guide to page 57. 4. If we with suitable true devotion maintain our Masonic profession, our faith will become a beam of light and bring us to those blessed mansions where we shall be eternally happy with God, the great architect of the universe. 5. Arcasian, a term signifying a Mason who by living in a strict obedience to obligation and precepts of the fraternity is free from sin. 6, step-by-step men advance toward perfection. Neither believe the new birth is needed. Russell teaches on the mysteries led him to teach a new covenant that was totally in the future. However, for some years, his followers were misled by the Watchtower article in September 1881, page 151 to 153, where Russell wrote, "In a sense, the operation of the new covenant begins with the gospel church and lifts us from the plane of degradation and sin to a justified or reckoned perfect condition." However, when Paul S.L. Johnson called his contradicting statements to his attention, Russell clarified the issue. Russell, in January and February of 1907, unequivocally announced that we see most distinctly that the new covenant belongs exclusively to the coming age. Both felt blacks were inferior to whites. Russell urged his Bible students not to waste tracts on blacks. Russell desired the reputation of not being prejudiced and for being for brotherhood, but his actions were words, and words tell a story of racial discrimination. The Golden Age, page 24 to 1925, page 207, Russell is quoted, "There's no servant in the world as good as a good colored servant, and the joy that he gets from rendering faithful service is one of the purest joys there is in the world." For many years, Negroes were not allowed to attend regular conventions, but were furnished their own. For more references on Watchtower racism, the reader can look at page 285 of Apocalypse Denied and the New Leader, 17 October 1955. Russell's views of women wasn't high. In the new creation, he states women are Satan's most effective tool. The adversary has found women his most effective tool. He further speaks of women limitations and repeats his thoughts. The great adversary, who although ready to use either sex as his tool, always found women his most efficient representatives. Masonry. Interestingly, the Freemasons, just like Russell, wanted to be viewed as committed to the brotherhood of man, but yet they had racist policies and made anti-black statements. Freemasonry in American Culture, page 9 to 10. Neither the Watchtower nor the Masons were in the vanguard to change racism, but they have gone with the flow and are now different. Still, in the most states, Negroes and women are still excluded from the Masonic Brotherhood. There is a Negro Masonic system named the Prince Hall Lodge, but it suffers from a lack of recognition and is referred to as an illegitimate imitation. Women, because they are excluded from the lodge membership, remain in a sense of profane and limited even today. There's the Order of the Eastern Star, which is run by men for women, and women do participate in some events. Okay, let's continue with this guy.
This means the sun, and this is the wings that are referred to in Malachi. It doesn't mean that Charles Taze Russell was a Freemason. But this is where some might say, but what about the pyramids? Charles Taze Russell was obsessed with pyramidology. And in fact, some would say there's even suggestions that the Watchtower Society today is to some extent interested in pyramidology, which I will come to. But yes, it's true. Charles Taze Russell was fascinated with pyramids. He read the works of a number of, I'm just going to say it, 19th century crackpots who postulated that if you measured the interior chambers of pyramids by what were referred to as pyramid inches and counted all these pyramid inches, these inches corresponded with years in Bible prophecy, and you could arrive at all sorts of fantastic dates in Bible prophecy, which Charles Taze Russell used to back up his absurd claims about 1878, 1914, and so on. So Charles Taze Russell bought into all of this craziness, which is just clear nonsense. And by 1928, Joseph Rutherford had denounced pyramidology, which, if you think about it, is quite late in the game, because Charles Taze Russell died in October 31st, 1916. And it wasn't until 1928 that Joseph Rutherford finally said, we were wrong about that. But rather than humbly saying, it was a simple mistake, we're sorry, let's move on, Rutherford went one step further and said, the Pyramid of Giza wasn't built by Jehovah as God's stone witness. It was actually built by Satan to confuse people into thinking it had been built by Jehovah. So he replaced one crazy theory with another crazy theory, and that has never been contradicted in Watchtower literature. It's what I call a ghost teaching, a teaching that was put out there in Watchtower literature and has never been contradicted. So in theory, it's still a new light or spiritual food from Watchtower. But anyway, lots of XJWs point to the whole pyramid obsession as being further proof that Charles Taze Russell was involved in the occult, because when we think of pyramids, we think of, New Age stuff, we think of ceremonies, we think of pagan worship by the Egyptians. It has all sorts of strange connotations. But in fact, it was nothing more than, again, Russell borrowing ideas that were prevalent at the time and entirely barking up the wrong tree in his own interpretation of what the Bible said and what true worship of God involved. But this is where some XJWs will say, yes, but what about the assembly hall in Denmark that's the shape of a pyramid with the all-seeing eye, the Masonic all-seeing eye, or is it Illuminati? I don't know. But anyway, just to illustrate this, I'm showing you now, this is an image that literally popped up in my Facebook feed in the days leading up to filming this video, as if to remind me of how prevalent this thinking is among ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, and also to remind me to get on and make this video. So what we have here is an individual, I'm not going to name them, but they've posted this on Facebook. You have there the all-seeing eye on an American banknote. You have the stone pyramid that is near Russell's grave. It's important to emphasize that the pyramid isn't Russell's grave. It's near Russell's grave, and it doesn't have an all-seeing eye on it, at least not as far as I can tell. It has the cross and crown motif, and the wreath, which others would argue is also has Masonic links, but again, you can use the wreath without being a Mason and without wanting to point people towards Freemasonry and the occult. You can use it for purely aesthetic reasons. And then you have this satellite image. You'll see there it says JW's Conf, I think that means Conference Center, Denmark. And it's a triangular shape, seemingly in a pyramid shape, with an eye-like structure in it. And this is an assembly hall in Denmark that XJWs, or some XJWs, seem to be fascinated about, because they would argue that this points to Watchtower today still being linked in some way with pyramidology and therefore linked with the occult. Now, what's interesting is that when you actually go on Google Earth and find this assembly hall, I am going to put a link to the exact point on Google Earth in the description below so that you can do this yourself. But when you go to Google Earth and you find the assembly hall, what's interesting is you immediately notice that the triangle is not facing north as it is shown in the images that get circulated online. And I actually think there's something quite disingenuous about doing that. If you have to rotate an image to make it fit in with what you want to show, and you're not being clear about having done that, that for me has an element of trickery involved. You're trying to manipulate people into sharing the assumption that you have jumped to. The triangle is not facing north, and immediately you have to ask the question, If you're an organization and you want to secretly introduce the occult into your religious practices, you're telling me that the people who built this assembly hall, assuming that it was built by Jehovah's Witnesses, I don't know the construction history of this building, but let's assume Jehovah's Witnesses built it. They find a triangular plot of land that isn't pointing north and think, this is perfect for us to create a pyramid with an all-seeing eye. You can believe that if you want, but for me, this looks like a triangular plot of land where they've already decided that they will have an open-air amphitheatre, which has to have some kind of curve on it. If it were just a straight line, then people's view would be better in one part and not so good on the edges. So the amphitheatre, and you can see this with Roman amphitheatres, it has to have a curve on it so that everyone has an equal view. And because it's got this curve, and because they've put it in the part of the triangular plot of land that is the smallest, so that they can have the large area for parking, this must be an all-seeing eye. I'm sorry, you can buy into this conspiracy theory if you want to, but for me, it just doesn't cut it. A similar example of an ex-Jehovah's Witness conspiracy theory can be found in the suggestion that governing body members wear Masonic rings. And this seems to stem from the JW Broadcasting videos. Here you see, for example, the very first JW Broadcasting video, which was uploaded in October 2014. And you see there that on one hand, Stephen Lett is wearing his wedding ring, and on the other hand, he's wearing a pinky ring. And some would argue, this must be a Masonic ring or something that in some way links him with Freemasonry, or it's something that is like a signal to other Freemasons. First of all, it's very hard to see any kind of detail just from taking a still from a JW Broadcasting episode. JW Broadcasting episodes, like all Watchtower videos, are uploaded to the internet in 720p resolution. So 720p means 720 pixels vertical on your screen. I used to upload in 720p. I now upload, or at least try to upload, in 1080p, just in case you're interested. But 720p is like the minimum for HD. So it's not a very high resolution, and it's very hard to zoom in and see any kind of detail on 720p. The camera would need to be much closer to Stephen Lett's hand for us to see any kind of inscriptions or anything of that sort on his ring. Without the benefit of being able to do that, if we see a governing body member wearing a pinky ring, even though it's, in my opinion, kind of a silly thing for him to be wearing, sometimes a pinky ring is just a pinky ring. Same thing goes for Samuel Hurd's Rolex, or purported Rolex. You see him in the JW Broadcasting episodes, and he's wearing what appears to be an expensive Rolex. It could be an expensive Rolex, but because the video is only in 720p and the camera isn't zoomed into his watch, for all we know, it could just be a knockoff, or it could just be another make of watch that's been designed to look like a Rolex. And in any case, even if it were a Rolex, is it really worth jumping up and down about compared to all of the other things that we could be talking about, such as the shunning, such as the blood transfusions, such as the child abuse? Same thing with the pinky ring. Even if it were a Masonic ring, even if Stephen Lett were a Freemason and he met at lodge meetings, it's maybe interesting that he's in a second religion. It's maybe hypocritical for him as a governing body member to be condemning members of all other religions when he is moonlighting with another religion himself. I won't deny it would be interesting if that were the case. I would certainly want to talk about it, but it still wouldn't be the most important thing for us to be talking about as ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, even less interesting if it can't be proven, if it's just a total shot in the dark that Stephen Lett is there wearing a Masonic ring. Same thing with the Assembly Hall. Even if that were a Jehovah's Witness architect trying to point people towards the occult by building a pyramid that isn't pointing north, what does it really tell us? And is it really worth jumping up and down about that when we could be talking about a database that's being kept on Watchtower servers with tens of thousands of names of known or accused child abusers that aren't being turned over to the authorities, so that for every minute that those names are being withheld from law enforcement, there are children who are at risk from those individuals, and the abuse victims are probably stacking up as I'm making this video because of that secret database. Which is more important to be talking about? So that's why, as I said at the beginning of this video, I didn't want to make this video. In a way, I'm glad. Well, I am glad that my patrons asked me to make it, if only so that I can kind of get this off my chest and explain why it's kind of an irritation, because there are so many more important things that we need to be talking about as ex-Jehovah's Witnesses. And by the way, if you are an ex-Jehovah's Witness who is genuinely concerned about perceived links to Freemasonry, my question would be, why is this of concern to you? Why are the Freemasons in particular a threat to you, or in some way dangerous, or in some way malevolent or evil? I would encourage anyone who is genuinely interested in this subject to go on Netflix. I obviously realize that Netflix changes from one country to the next, but at least on my Netflix, you can actually watch a series called Inside the Freemasons. And I've watched the whole series, and I found it really interesting because it's such a kind of secretive organization. But like most, you could say, religious organizations, it is really a religious organization. Like most religious organizations, it's struggling to adapt to the 21st century, to the culture in which everything is open to criticism and skepticism. And Freemason numbers are struggling as well. So they are kind of on a charm offensive, which is why they've opened their doors and allowed a film crew some degree of access to shoot this series of videos. It has its limitations. As far as I'm concerned, it's a little bit too much of a PR piece, a propaganda piece. They don't really ask the hard questions that I would expect a journalist to be asking of a group like Freemasons. I watched the series and was left thinking, here we have a very sexist community. I'm sorry, I realize that there will be some watching who are Freemasons, and I've had people object to me making that observation on Twitter, saying, oh, we're not sexist just because we're all men, because you can actually be a female Freemason. You just join the female version of Freemasonry, which is a bit of a cop-out as far as I'm concerned. It would be a little bit like if Jehovah's Witnesses were all male and you had to be a man to be baptized as a Jehovah's Witness. But later on in the organization's history, a bunch of women got together and said, well, we want to be Jehovah's Witnesses too. We'll set up a female Jehovah's Witnesses organization. That doesn't really excuse the sexism of the first organization, does it? You are an organization that is saying, if you want to understand, if you want true wisdom, true divine wisdom, true knowledge, this is the path that you need to follow, and it helps if you're a man. I'm sorry, that's just sexist. And there are other problems as well, which I have with Freemasons, which again weren't fully discussed in this documentary. They keep stressing that there is no monetary advantage to being a Freemason. that there isn't corruption, that there isn't a culture of you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. But that's quite clearly the case. And there's an article that was recently published in The Guardian titled "Secret Freemasons Should Have No Place in Public Life" by Dawn Foster, in which Dawn does raise some very important arguments about the extent to which Freemasonry has its foot or has its claws in public life, so that you can have a situation where, say, a police officer is a member of the same lodge as a criminal he's investigating. Would that not clearly pose a problem? Would that not clearly in some way pervert the course of justice? So there are issues I have with Freemasonry, but I'm guessing that most ex-witnesses who are alarmed about potential links with Freemasonry are alarmed not so much for those reasons, but more for religious reasons, because they've been trained to think of Freemasonry as heresy against Christianity, which isn't really a concern for me, because I'm an atheist. I think that all religions, all religious groups, whether it's Freemasonry, whether it's Baptists, whether it's Jehovah's Witnesses, whether it's Mormons, whether it's Buddhists, you name it, I think they're all essentially based on things that aren't true and on wish thinking from my perspective. So it's a level playing field as far as I'm concerned. So I struggle to think of why you would be alarmed at a potential link with Freemasonry to begin with, unless it were for subjective religious reasons. But I think that's everything I have to say really on this subject. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Again, I need to thank my patrons with gritted teeth for recommending that I make this video. Hopefully, if nothing else, it's been entertaining. Don't forget to subscribe to the John Cedars channel for more such videos. And as always, thank you for watching.
Wow, what a total shill. That was a total shill. I mean, he just brought up the weakest arguments. Go to bewisestserpents.blogspot.com and go to the section on Jehovah's Witnesses and see what I have listed there. Anyway, that's it for right now. I'm going to go for now. All right, bye.